it is officially the end of an era. It looks like Apple is planning to shutter iTunes, which has been the hub for all of its media content for the past 18 years. Over the weekend, Apple cleared its iTunes Instagram and Facebook pages for iTunes, redirecting followers to Apple TV. The company is likely going to make the announcement at its Worldwide Developers Conference today in San Jose, California, and our own Dan Howley is out there with the very latest. Dan, what does this mean here? They're really into siloing services here, right?
Yeah, so what really is going to happen is we're getting rumors and reports that what they'll do is kill off iTunes as we know it. That service that we've used for, God knows how long is going to end, and it'll be split up. Right now, there's already a podcast app on iOS, you have the TV app on iOS, and you have Apple Music on iOS. Right now, iTunes exists mostly on the Mac with Mac OS, but that's where it's going to end, and we'll see the podcast app, the TV app, and the music app all exist separately there. So it really does look like the end of an era for iTunes. And how many of you guys have actually used iTunes recently? I'm sure if you're using Apple's music service, you're using Apple Music. If you're watching video, you're on Apple TV or one of the millions of competitors that are out there. And if you're listening to podcasts, you're just, using Apple's podcast app. So iTunes really feels obsolete at this point. So it makes sense for them to want to sunset it. I'm sure they'll give it some kind of nice going off here or something along those lines, considering it really did change the way how we downloaded music, we downloaded TV, and it kind of helped usher in the end of piracy and made downloading music more accessible to millions of people around the world. So it'll be an interesting keynote when they make that announcement.
And it feels like a retirement party of sorts. I think when I think about iTunes and the last time I used it, it was the mandatory YouTube being downloaded onto our iTunes, and it sometimes automatically plays for me, and I don't have any interest in listening to it. No offense to you two. But what else do we expect from WWDC besides this iTunes potentially going away?
So we're also expecting, obviously, big updates to Apple's iOS. It'll be iOS 13. That's the operating system that runs the iPhone and the iPad. And what we're looking at there is potentially a new dark mode that people have been asking for forever. It'll basically make it a little easier on the eyes when you look at your iPhone or your iPad. A lot of talk about a new kind of interoperability between iOS apps and Mac OS apps, where you'll be able to use apps that have traditionally been only on iOS on macOS. Now, they started this last year with the News app, the stock apps, and they're looking to expand that potentially. There's also talk of being able to use multiple windows for individual apps on the iPad. So that would increase the productivity factor of that device, making it more of a kind of laptop replacement. There's also, believe it or not, been rumors that you might be able to use a mouse with the iPad, which, would make sense for certain applications and make it more of a just overall more useful device. And then finally for the iPad, there's talk of making a dedicated app for using it as a secondary screen for your laptop. So if you're a worker on the road and you need that extra screen real estate, that would be really helpful. There's also a potential app called, or updates to the Health app that would give you information on when to dose for your medication, and then women's health tracking. So those are two big updates to the Health app that would make it even more useful than it already is.
Howley, real quick question for you about iTunes here. And maybe this is stupid, but I bet you a few viewers have wondered the same thing. Maybe I'm just out of touch. But we talk so much about how no one needs to buy music anymore because you can access it. I know that's the whole thing. If you're an Apple Music member, you can just listen to it, download on the go. But I want to ask you, does anyone still buy songs, individual songs through Apple? And if they do, I guess, can you do that through Apple Music? Do old people do that? Who buys music and how?
Yeah. People definitely still do buy individual songs. A lot of them like to do it for offline listening, though you can do that with other streaming apps as well. I think really what they recognize is that one album sale is one album sale, but if you get the recurring revenue stream of a subscriber through Apple Music, it just makes more financial sense for Apple to be able to do that. And then artists, they don't get paid as well per stream as they would per sale, but it's still something that they would get every time a stream goes through. So I think for Apple, it makes more sense for them to be using Apple Music versus the individual sales of iTunes. And for a lot of people, it just feels more, reasonable for purchasing. You spend $8, $9, $10 a month on a streaming service. That's great. You get access to millions of songs. Whereas if you spend, $12, you might only get access to one album. So I think for more people, it just makes more sense. And Apple recognizes that and is saying, well, if that's where people want to go, that's where we're going to go.
Right, go where the people are. And I'm probably the only one, but I still occasionally buy a CD, Dan, to listen to in my car. All right, thanks so much, Howley.
That is ridiculous.
Good stuff, thanks, Dan. And be sure to stay with Yahoo Finance for complete live coverage of the Apple Worldwide Developers Conference, the WWDC, right here at yahoofinance.com or on our app all day today.